What is up, guys? Pie Muffin here, and we are back, technically, with another Trails of Cold Steel 2 video. Obviously, I finished up the playthrough itself completely earlier today, actually. And like I said, I was going to cover the Black Record stuff, which is a New Game Plus exclusive thing. So obviously, because I wasn't doing a New Game Plus, I wasn't able to cover that in my playthrough. And I'm not going to do a full another playthrough right now just to add it to the playthrough. So what we're going to do instead is on the Kiseki Wiki, or the Trails Wiki in English, they have the full Black Records here, as well as all the other books like you might find in the game. So if you don't want to struggle to make sure you get every single book at a very specific shop through an entire playthrough, you can read them here. By the way, I did decide I am not going to be covering the Carnelia book and the Gambler Jack books. There's a million videos on YouTube of people, reading them aloud. So I figure if you really want to know, you can read them there. I'm going to read them myself in private before starting my Cold Steel 3 playthrough. And then, of course, I'll just talk about it, kind of when stuff that's pertinent comes up about it. But the Black Records I do want to cover because it is kind of main story imperative. And, of course, right away, you get a spoiler on this. Thomas Lysander is the author of the Black Records. He's been the ones writing about it. So let's go back here for a second. So let's do some history about the Black Records, since I don't have it pulled up, and I do have the cutscene downloaded. So we are going to watch the cutscene together. I couldn't find the cutscene in Japanese, unfortunately, so we are going to watch the cutscene in English, so it'll break our Japanese playthrough immersion a little bit, but that's fine. But we'll watch that after we look at all of this. So I'm not going to go too deep into this stuff right here, because it does have spoilers for Cold Steel 3 and 4, and if you're just watching my playthrough as a way of enjoying the series, I don't want to spoil you on that. But the Black Records is an artifact that was inherited by the Arnor family. It appears as a book series that can be collected during New Game Plus of Cold Steel 2 and throughout Cold Steel 3. I think in Cold Steel 3 you can just find them, and what I'm going to do for Cold Steel 3 is I'm going to make sure at all times to have the guide pulled up as to where the Black Records are, so that way we don't actually miss any. And then Cold Steel 4 has one final volume. Okay. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but long story short, the Black Record describes major events throughout history of Erebonia all the way up to 1206. They are considered Black history books since they contain information not accessible to the public. All right, that's all I want to say about that. So let's go to the books themselves. Let's go back. There are a number of books here. We are going to look at the ones that are actually imperative here. So, Trails of Cold Steel 2 books. No, that's not what I wanted. Black Records. Wait. Okay, yeah, here we go. So there are 5 books here to go over. So we're going to read them, and that's pretty much going to be it. So let's take a look at it. The Gods of Creation, before Septian calendar. So this is way, way, way in the past. In the beginning, there were 2 great gods. One boasted unrivaled courage, the other unparalleled fortitude. They descended from the heavens with their kin, and it was upon the dark land below that they first met. Calamity, their opposing natures incompatible. The 2 were drawn irresistibly into battle, and thus began a struggle that shook heaven and earth. I had to make sure I didn't say goddesses. The goddess and the spirit's laments were for naught. As the land quaked, the skies were torn asunder, and the gods' kin could only tremble in fear. After what seemed like an eternity, their clash came to an end, but it was an end of mutual defeat. Their power spent, the empty shells of the 2 celestial titans were flung into the furthest reaches of the dark land. All that remained were terrible, their kin, and the great power. This is obviously supposed to be like some of this stuff is redacted. When you're actually looking at the books in game, there will be like black lines, kind of like when we were looking at the DG cult stuff before we were able to decipher that. There's like black lines, so this is pretty much all you have there. All right, so that's the first chapter. That's the Gods of Creation. So with there, obviously, so how the world began, there were two gods, and they battled, and that's kind of what formed, I guess, the world. Year 371, Septi encounters. This is still very, very long ago. This is obviously still... So what? Cold Steel 2 ends in the beginning of 1205. So this is almost 900 years before that. So year 371, Septi encounter. 200 years after Heimdallr was first founded, Ruin rose on monstrous wings from the depths of the earth. Its name was Zora Agruga, the Dark Dragon. A malevolent creature of terrible power, it spread a miasma throughout the capital that turned Heimdallr into a city of the dead. But the horrors did not end there. The evil dragon desecrated the corpses of the fallen, taking control of their bodies and using them to attack those who remained alive, further increasing the legions of the dead. The emperor at the time, Astorius II, was forced to flee the city with what remained of his household and citizens. Together they retreated south and established a new capital in the land of Saint Arc. So I don't think we've heard of Saint Arc yet, but I do recall that it's something that's going to be mentioned later, as well as the dragon Zoro Agruga. Time had oh wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. For 100 years, the Bane of Heimdallr went unchallenged until Hector I, the 7th Emperor of Erebonia, resolved to recapture the city. Time had proved an ally to the beast, however, and the dragon's influence had spread over the surrounding area like a plague. So 100 years, they were unable to do anything about this dragon. So Heimdallr was just a den of, raised dead and a dark dragon for a whole 100 years. And somehow the world just didn't come to an end. I'm going to assume that this, obviously they might explain it here, but I'm guessing that's because maybe the dragon just didn't, as long as no one entered the city or got near the city, it didn't really bother anybody. It just kind of had it as its fortress. So it never really went out to, destroy other areas. Because otherwise, I can't imagine how the world would still be here. Undaunted, Hector I led an army of brave knights into the necropolis in an attempt to free it. But though their hearts were steadfast, their arrival was met by legions of powerful fiends, and their efforts seemed doomed to end in failure. It was then that Hector I had a fateful encounter with none other than the great Vermilion Knight, Testarossa. Obviously, we saw Testarossa at the end of Cold Steel 2. Obviously, what they shoved Cedric into. The knight recognized Hector I as its master, and bolstered by its immense power and countless weapons, the Emperor moved once again on the city and to the decisive encounter with the Dark Dragon. So this is obviously how they retook the city, but it still doesn't explain how the Vermilion Knight had to be sealed away in Heimdallr. The battle shook the city to its core, and at the end, the Vermilion Knight was victorious. The Scourge of Heimdallr, the Dark Dragon, was defeated. However, the price for victory was steep. The corrupted blood that flowed from the dragon claimed Hector's life and defiled even the knight itself, placing a curse upon it. Okay, so this is probably going to lead into how it became known as the Vermilion Apocalypse, I think it was called. The noble Testarossa became the Crimson Calamity, a demon with 1,000 weapons that only reacts to the blood of the Arnor family, a destructive force on par with the Dark Dragon that, should control of it ever be lost, would threaten the world and all who live in it. It was sealed deep underground, never intended again to see the light of day. Meanwhile, a new city rose from the ash of the old, and the people once again began to gather in Heimdallr. And that was when the Vermilion capital that endures to this day was first built. So that's when Heimdallr... So they said 100 years later, and this was... So it would have been 471 on the Septian calendar when they actually built Heimdallr. Roughly. Maybe a few years after that. Okay. Let's move on to the War of the Lions. Year 947. This is obviously what we know. Okay, I didn't mean for that to pop up. What we learned about in Cold Steel 2 about the War of the Lions being 250 years, prior to present day. So yeah, year 947. In the year 947, Emperor Valius V passed away. His death heralded the beginning of the largest scale civil war in Erebonian history. Valius V was a ruler with a somewhat debaucherous reputation, and is said to have had countless wives and concubines. To further complicate the matter of succession, many of those wives came from prestigious noble families, all of whom began competing for power and wanted their offspring to take the throne. Within the days of Valius V's death, Crown Prince Manfred, that's a name, the son of his first wife, was assassinated by an unknown party. Following the death of the Crown Prince, the fourth prince and the son of the first of Emperor Valius's secondary wives, Prince Orthros, we know him, seized the capital by force. So Orthros was that's Cayenne's ancestor, I believe. The one he was trying to say like his ancestor was robbed of, the right to rule. So this is who that was. Seized the capital by force. Once in control, he declared himself the new emperor and began purging all those who dared to oppose him. The coup set off a succession of counterclaims and 3 other princes who named themselves to be the new emperor. Backed by the powerful noble families of their mothers, the competing princes ignited a bloody 5-year-long civil war, and thus the War of the Lions began. So once again, that's what they mean when they said, when Vita was telling us, history repeats itself. It goes through the same thing. Obviously, things change as time goes on. Obviously, the war with the Dark Dragon was very different, but it was still a war. And it had to do with, essentially who is in charge of, Erebonia. And once again here with the War of the Lions, a 5-year-long civil war with a bunch of noble families, fighting for power. At first, the prince's armies were largely equal in terms of strength. It wasn't until Orthros, who would later come to be known as the False Emperor, yep, we know that, revived the being that had long been sealed under the city, that the balance of power shifted. The Testarossa, the legendary Vermilion Knight now tainted by the blood of Zoro-Agruga, saw the light of day once more. So, once again, you compare this to modern day, and you, of course, to the previous chapter we read, everything that lines up is with the Vermilion Knight being awakened again. Or the Vermilion Knight just being used in general for the war that, was happening. With its unmatched strength under his control, Orthros decimated his greatest competition in one fell swoop, and the 5th prince, Gunnar, was defeated. It seemed inevitable that the armies and the other princes would share the same fate, but it was this pivotal point that the war took yet another surprising turn. This unexpected development came in the form of another great knight, the Palatinate Knight. The famed champion was acquired by Prince Lucius, the 6th and youngest of the feuding brothers. And with its power, he was able to defeat the army of the brilliant strategist and the 2nd prince, Albert. Victorious and backed by the knight's power, Prince Lucius was poised to challenge Orthros. Prince Gunnar and Albert's armies, however, were not completely wiped out and decided to join forces with one another in order to oppose the other princes. It was thus that the war became one fought by 3 separate groups: Prince Orthros with the Vermilion Knight, Prince Lucius with the Palatinate Knight, and Princes Gunnar and Albert, who had no knight but compensated with sheer numbers. I still don't see, especially in the past, this is obviously way before the Orbital Revolution, did they have magic back then? I don't understand if they, did they just have lances and swords and, bows and arrows and they were fighting the Divine Knights? How did that even, happen? The War of the Lions had been raging for 2 years now, and the chaos only worsened by the day. Erebonia seemed fated to fall into ruin and darkness, fitting, perhaps, for a nation that takes its name from Erebos. I don't know what Erebos means, but, you know what? Let me just pull up what Erebos would even mean. So, Erebos. Erebos in Greek religion, the god of dark region, the god of a dark region of the underworld, and the personification of darkness. Okay, you know what? Yeah, that is very fitting. I would say so. All right, Chapter 4, or Black Records 4. Dracos takes up arms. Year 949, so like they said, 2 years later. A young man lazed up on a grassy plain, enjoying a nap in the peaceful setting. Before long, however, his rest was interrupted by the arrival of a second young man on horseback. The youth wore the trappings of a knight, and his expression was deathly serious. His armor bore many rents and scratches, and his left arm was bound in a bloody bandage. The first young man had not seen him in several years, but a cheerful reunion did not seem to be his purpose. "You were right after all," the second man said gravely. "At this rate, the Empire's days are numbered." At this, the first young man rose from the grass. He was none other than the third prince of the Erebonian Empire, Prince Drykos. As a man with no claim to the throne due to his commoner mother and shunned by other high-born princes, Drykos had long since left Erebonia behind, wandering from place to place and whiling away his days. 3 years prior, he had reached the land of Nord, where he had remained ever since. Okay, as we learned when we visited Nord, that Drykos was very close with the Nordic people. Though left to his own devices since childhood, his nature was noble, and he was quickly accepted by the people of Nord and lived peacefully among them. But when he had left his homeland, he had not truly abandoned it in his heart. During his wanderings, his mother had passed away. But while she lived, she had told him something that would remain with him for the rest of his days. "The blood flowing through you will not allow you to turn your back on the Empire's suffering." Prince Drykos had turned those words over in his head again and again. What could a powerless vagrant like himself truly hope to do? The knight's arrival, however, signified two things: that the war continued to worsen, and that Erebonia was on a certain path to ruination. His mother was probably correct. Hearing the knight's words, he decided that enough was enough. He could ignore the pain of his countrymen no longer. That knight, incidentally, was called Roland. He was a childhood friend of Drykos and was his confidant. He was also the man who Drykos had left in charge of things in his place before leaving the country. Prince Drykos set about preparing to depart, but before he could finish, he was met by several of the tall knights of Nord. Their cross-shaped spears in hand, they too were close friends of Drykos, and they volunteered to accompany him and Roland, fearing that the two men alone would not stand a chance. I mean, they did mention that the people of Nord did fight alongside Drykos as well. The next morning, the prince departed the village. The mere 17 men under his command, they bade farewell of the people of the settlement, and its elder wished them well. "May the winds and the goddess be with you." He blessed them. "Fortune favor you all." So pretty much they've kept the same kind of prayer, I guess you could call it, in all this time, because this is still what the people of Nord still say. All right, number 5. I believe this is the last one. Yeah, this is the last one that you get in Cold Steel 2. Year 952. Okay, so 3 years after that. So as they said, the war was 5 years long. Prince Drykos' opponents were the armies of the 4th Prince Orthros and his Vermilion Knight, 6th Prince Lucius and his Palatinate Knight, and the combined forces of the remaining princes, Gunnar and Albert, who had a legion of magical golems under their control. So the magic knights, I assume. Yet it was he, the illegitimate son of a commoner and the latecomer to the war, who emerged triumphant. His victory did not come without losses, however. During his return to Erebonia, Roland fell in battle. Not long after that, however, he met a woman who would change his destiny forever. We know who that's going to be. That woman was none other than the daughter of Count Sandlot, who hailed from the lakeside town of Legram. Her charismatic personality and peerless skills with the lance earned her the leadership of a band of knights known as the Eisenritter and the moniker Lance Maiden. Her name was Leanne Sandlot, which, we all are supposed to assume that the Ouroboros member, Why can't I think of her name? Arianrhod is supposed to be her as well, but obviously, with the information we have right now, that wouldn't make any sense. This was, 250 years ago. How would she still be alive? Prince Drycles and Leanne Sandlot may have come from wildly different backgrounds, but their concern for the innocent victims of the war united them in the purpose to bring an end to the bloodshed, and it was those shared feelings that made them join forces. The two of them, along with the warriors of Nord, the Eisenritter, and all the people of the nation whose hearts had been moved, liberated one town after another, and were eventually successful in persuading even Prince Lucius, owner of the Palatinate Knight, to fight for their cause. At the same time, however, the false emperor schemed to elevate the cursed Vermilion Knight to even greater power, to godhood, and thus the Vermilion Apocalypse was created. So that's what we got to know it by now. The demonic god emerged in Heimdallr alongside a monstrous castle and vanquished the approaching armies of Albert and Gunnar in a single battle. Their end was anything but conventional, however. They were simply erased from existence, so they weren't even killed. Even the Palatinate Knight could not contend with such a foe and felled. And as it decimated all those who challenged the false emperor, countless crimson spirit veins spread out from the castle, stealing the very life from the capital's citizens, as well as those in the surrounding area. That's also that's what we were seeing happen in Cold Steel 2 as well, with everyone who was fighting outside. Defeat seemed all but inevitable for Prince Drycles, the Lance Maiden, and their followers, but they refused to give up. Following the guidance of a kindly witch, they were led to a new great knight, which slumbered in the outskirts of Heimdallr. Okay, so someone from Emma and Vita's clan. After overcoming a trial, they were able to claim the Ashen Knight and its power, so Valimar. With it in hand, along with their many supporters and the army of Prince Lucius, they marched on for the capital for the final time, eventually making their way to the castle at its center. 3 days later, on the 4th of July, year 952, the castle vanished from existence and the city was liberated. So we don't even get information as to, what happened, but we presume it was a similar thing. So Drycles and Leanne Sandlot probably climbed, the castle the same way that Class 7 did, and probably had supporters that were stopping whoever the false emperor was having in their path. So very interesting stuff there to learn. And now that we've read all of that, we know the full story of, how all this relates in the Black Records. We have a video to watch, which I did go ahead and download to my computer. So let me just open that up real quick. Just give me a second. No, I'm not trying to change. Window capture, that's what I'm trying to change. There we go. Like I said, this scene, I found someone, uploaded as a YouTube video. It is in English, so sorry to break immersion real quick, but essentially what'll happen is, right when you're doing the old schoolhouse thing at the end of Cold Steel 2 and a New Game Plus, you'll have Thomas and Rosine standing up here, and you get a little dialogue scene with them. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Oh, well, I'm already making mistakes. The audio is not coming out of the correct place. All right, let's try that again.
My. Who would have imagined even more marvelous mysteries still lurked within the old schoolhouse? What a delight! Why, I can hardly stop myself from heading in there to take a little peek.
That might not be the best idea right now. There's no telling what could happen in there.
Oh, come now, I was only kidding. I wouldn't dream of rushing in to steal the thrill of discovery for myself. But, all joking aside, I take it you finished reading those deciphered passages from the Black Records I gave you, Reen?
Huh?
Deciphered?
Well, sure, I looked through them, but why do you ask? And what's Rosine doing here anyway?
Well,
Questions, so many questions. Please, allow me to elucidate.
So, as you can already see, from what I remember, there's like specific stores you can buy the books from, and then you, I guess, bring them to Instructor Thomas, and he gives them back to you, or something. From what it understands, from what I understand, if I can speak. And then he goes ahead and does this, where he's gonna talk to Reen alone.
What's going on? This is just like when I called out to Valimar that first time.
To put it simply, I've created a partition of sorts. The three of us standing here within are the only ones who can even sense it. Meanwhile, those outside remain blissfully unaware of its existence. I'll admit, for a moment there, I was worried that Emma and Celine might have noticed something amiss, but it seems I've still got the touch.
Just who the hell are you? And you too, Rosine. Why are you wearing your habit all of a sudden?
Starting off with the basics, I see. Perfectly fine by me. Who the hell am I indeed? My formal ties are to the Septian Church, as a member of the Gralsritter.
Well, there you have it. He is just the same. And you know what the crazy thing is? He's probably the most secretive of it. Like, you always knew there was something off about him, especially starting with Cold Steel 2. But it was hard to really picture what, because he never really did anything specific. It's not like with Wazzy and Kevin, where they made it painfully clear after a certain point what they were about. Whereas Thomas, you couldn't really tell. You just had certain characters being like, hey, maybe you should stop fooling around, or maybe you should stop holding back.
Second among the Dominion, in fact.
So he's number
I
2.
stand at the right hand of our leader, and am known by some as the Partitioner.
Now, of course, they've said that a Gralsritter's number, or a Dominion's number, is not, a meaning of their strength. But in his case, it might actually be. He might actually be the second strongest if he's the right... Because we know Ein is, the leader. So that means he answers directly to Ein. He's the right hand.
But you already know my real name, of course. I've never hidden that from you. I am and shall always be Thomas Lysander.
Yep.
I'm a squire, tasked with supporting him in the execution of
So
his
Rosine
duties.
is his squire.
You could say I'm an apprentice knight of the Gralsritter.
What? Hold on. What? The Gralsritter? Do they have something to do with the Congregation for the Sacraments Scarlet was talking about?
That they do, Reen. We're a secret sect of the Congregation, an unseen face. Our organization's existence isn't known to the wider world, nor should it be.
Our primary purpose is to gather and seal away dangerous artifacts. But every once in a blue moon, it becomes necessary to undertake covert operations like this one.
I guess I shouldn't be surprised. To be honest, I felt like there was something off about you for a while now. You were able to decipher the Black Records for one. Your knowledge and abilities go way beyond the average instructors. But even still, I never would have guessed you were connected to something this large scale. And with all that in mind, what do you want with me? Why tell me all of this now? Have you finally decided to step out from the shadows and interfere?
That's not quite it.
Perish the thought, Reen. What happens in the old schoolhouse is out of our jurisdiction. Always has been. The way things stand brings to mind a few parallels with Liberal's Phantasma trouble, but I doubt this is nearly as dangerous.
Well, you got involved with that. Well,
After we're done here, I'll be glad to let you tackle that on your own.
I was going to say they got involved with that because obviously Kevin and Reese were involved, but they kind of got dragged in out of their own free will, kind of. like Kevin was looking to be punished, but it's not like he actively wanted everyone to be dragged into Phantasma.
Me, I'm only here for a little talk with you. After all, you are an Awakener, possessor of a fragment of the Great Power. And that means we have matters to discuss. This should come as no surprise, but the trouble facing this land is far from over. Now, it may seem to have passed for now, but this peace is merely a simple respite. The most crucial moment stands silent in the wings, waiting to unfurl before us.
Okay.
The Chancellor never stops spinning his webs, and while he may have repelled Ouroboros for now, they will be back. Mark my words. And there's not a doubt in my mind that you'll have an important role to play in what's to come.
Well, yeah, he's the main character.
That's why I thought it would be worthwhile to make a formal introduction and ask for your cooperation. So, what say you?
Sir, if I may, you might want to ease him into this a little more gently. It's quite a lot to take in at once. Rean, I want you to know we're not here to scare you or to make an enemy of you. We don't mean to pressure you into a response either. For now, our intent is just to remain here and keep an eye on things. So if there's ever anything you need our help with, we're here for you. Just ask and we'll do whatever we can.
Thanks, Rosine. You're right, too. This is a lot to take in at once. I'm not really sure how to respond.
That's
Guess
fair.
at the very least, I can tell you're not my enemies. But by the same token, that doesn't necessarily make you my allies either. So, no promises.
I understand completely, Ring. And for the time being, that's perfectly fine. But to return to an earlier topic, those black records you found are actually of particular interest as historical artifacts.
Uh-huh.
As far as I can tell, their purpose was to record the true history of the Divine Knights. Given that recovering artifacts like those is our job, well, if you happen to find any more, do pass them along to us.
But he's the
would you?
author. Unless they just mean
I'll
he's
give
the
you
author
transcripts
because
of everything I can
he deciphered them.
decipher, of course. Given what you've read so far, I'm sure you must be curious.
I'll give it some thought.
Just like that, we're done.
Huh? 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 Huh?
What in the...
Well, do take care, everyone. I'll be praying for you.
Of course you will.
All right, and there you have it. That is pretty much what you get if you do the new game plus stuff for Cold Steel 2. So that's everything about the Black Records that I wanted to cover. So I will put this at the end of the Cold Steel 2 playthrough. And then shortly after finishing this video, I will be getting started on Cold Steel 3. Like I said, I'm not going to do the Gambler Jack and Carnelia stuff because it's really not super imperative. Even up to, you know, without spoiling too much, even up to the modern games, what they're at now, none of that stuff is like... The Gambler Jack stuff is a little important for some side characters, but not anything like important main story-wise. And then same thing for the Carnelia stuff. It really just has to do with Toval's backstory. But of course, I still urge people to read them. You know, look up that some people have done like audio videos where they just read it out. I would recommend doing that, kind of like what I did here with the Black Records. I would recommend looking into that if you're going to continue watching my playthroughs for Cold Steel 3 and beyond. But that's going to be it. So next time we're going to be hopping into Trails of Cold Steel 3 and see where Class 7 ends up. So that's going to be it, guys. Hope you all enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new to the channel. I'll see you all next time. Have a wonderful day, everyone.